Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, I don't know if there's a program across the country that is more misunderstood than South Carolina going into 2025. And look, I get it. LaNorris, the opportunity to be really the best quarterback that we see in the country in 2025. Dylan Stewart, arguably the best edge rusher we see in the country going into the fall. I feel like the narrative around South Carolina is they're only going to be good in 2025 because they have a few really good football players. And although that's true, like South Carolina has the opportunity to have some of the best players across the country in the 2025 season. I feel like we've spent a lot of time talking LaNorris, talking Dylan Stewart, probably not giving enough love to some of these other players on this football team. Want to get into five of our most underrated football players on this roster going into the 2025 year. Kind of highlight some names that we probably should be talking a little bit more about. Fired up to get into it before we do, and as always, to the South Carolina fans, look, I am sure that the South Carolina fans have a few names that deserve to be mentioned. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Number one, like the South Carolina fans, the amount of support y'all have shown the fellas has been amazing. Number two, we learn a lot from you guys in the comment section. Let it fly. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, let's start with the honestly, one of the best football players on the South Carolina team, at least in my opinion, going into 2025. Brandon Cisse, a transfer from NC State at the cornerback position, guy that can play nickel, guy that can play the boundary cornerback spot. When he's been healthy, when he's been on the field, really has been an elite boundary cornerback. What does he bring to South Carolina in 2025 here?
I think in terms of like transfer portal fit, I think it makes a lot of sense when you compare, I think, what North Carolina State like to do and what South Carolina like to do. Both kind of play a similar style on defense. So I think he's coming in with a really good sense of how to play that zone scheme that South Carolina likes. And I think been really well developed at NC State. I mean, that's a really, really well coached defense.
Yes.
And he certainly is like part of one of those guys that I think fits that South Carolina mold where I think you said it, like he can do a lot of different things. He is pretty versatile. I think he can play man. I think he can play zone. And I think that's a crucial kind of element when you're trying to be an effective South Carolina defensive back.
And I feel like he's being slept on because you don't look at the box score and see 15 pass breakups and 5 interceptions. Not a lot of people throw at him. Like when he was on the field for NC State last year, he only had 27 targets, only gave up 14 receptions, a 51% completion percentage when targeted. Here's my favorite number about this kid: 3.4% missed tackle rate. That is becoming such an important stat to look for in these boundary cornerbacks. Where is college football going? Like all of these opposing offenses, they're just trying to get the football out quick to the playmakers in space and let them do the rest. You have to have boundary cornerbacks that are comfortable coming up and tackling in space. Brandon Cisse is one of those guys. And I think he has the potential to be like an all-conference defensive back for South Carolina, Dill, which I think is going to be big because – yeah, we have some question marks about the front seven, specifically the depth of the defensive line. Teams are going to want to run at South Carolina, and I don't blame them for wanting to run at South Carolina. If you have some legitimate lockdown boundary cornerbacks that you trust on islands, you can start rolling your safeties into the box. You can start cheating to maybe protect a front seven that might need to spend the first half of the season getting their feet wet. And I think that's what South Carolina is probably going to look to do early in the season. Say, hey, Brandon Cisse, we trust you out on the boundary against some of the best wide receivers in the country, and we're going to need you to hold up. And I think he's capable of doing it.
And I think he's part of a really potentially very good duo.
Yes, agreed.
There's another guy you talk about
underrated
players. I think he's really go back and watch that Ole Miss game. I know it wasn't like the most fun game for South Carolina. And
South Carolina fans are probably gonna be like, "Yeah, we'll pass on that."
Just watch the defense. I know the offense had their issues in that game, but like you watch what he was able to do. I think again, you talk about a guy who really comfortable with the ball in the air down the field when you need to be comfortable if you're going to play one-on-one. Like you see so many guys take penalties and be a little bit handsy. I look at Judge Collier as a guy who is still a relatively young player. I feel like almost people like sleep on that a little bit. I think him and Cisse can be part of a really, really good duo of guys who don't necessarily need a ton of help from their safety.
Could I add the nickel corner here too, and Jalen Kilgore, who might be the best defensive back on this football team, all going into their junior year? Like these aren't fifth year seniors. Like they've been really good, but are also getting better at the sport. You feel like the secondary needs to be great, and I think it has the opportunity to as well in 2025. Dill, here's another guy, and this is kind of my guy, and a really funny dude to talk about because Dill, 2 years ago, this was the spring game leading into the 2023 season, I believe. You looked at Bryan Thomas and was like, that that kid's got some game. And he's been like a pretty consistent contributor for South Carolina. Now, we don't talk a ton about him because last year, Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart emerged as probably the best edge rusher duo you saw in the country. Going into 2025, everybody wants to talk about Dylan Stewart, rightfully so. Look, Dylan Stewart's he's going to get the superstar treatment going into the 2025 year. Like there's going to be running back help. There's going to be tight ends trying to chip him. Like offenses are going to build their game plan around Dylan Stewart and how to avoid his game wrecking ability, which is going to leave Bryan Thomas on the other side with a massive chance to impact a lot of football games. And Dill, he 300 plus snaps the last 2 years, always has been consistently a good football player when he's on the field. You feel like 2025 is his opportunity to not only really wreck games, but play a lot of football, because you look at South Carolina in that edge room and say, a little bit thinner than maybe you want it. You're probably going to have to rely on Dylan Stewart and Bryan Thomas to play a lot of football. Can this kid go from really dang solid and underappreciated to a household name in 2025? That feels like another massive storyline in terms of how good this South Carolina football team can be in the 2025 year.
I mean, it's really going to be about him completing his game, let's say,
Oh,
because
yeah,
he can rush the passer. I mean, he's got really good first step quickness, has a good tool bag of moves, can win inside and out. It's if he can play the run and be effective and tough in that situation. Because even in that Illinois game, you certainly saw some moments where well, again, if you play that way against the run, it's going to be hard to be a dependable, all down player. So he's going to need to get that part of his game going. Because if he does, I mean, and that catches up to his pass rush ability, he'll be a really
good Dill, that's the thing is, I feel like he's capable of play. Like there are flashes of that's how you keep your outside shoulder free and get involved in the run game. I feel like it's a little bit more of hey, we're trying to make too many plays out here and shooting gaps a little bit more than we need to.
Well, and I think that's an element of his game, because that is what
his
quickness and that ability. So it's again, that's probably just a balance. But there are some plays where you just straight up need to be able to take a tight end on and not get moved around. So
those Illinois tight ends were freaking hammers against the in the run game, and I will give them credit. But I do agree, Dill, pass rush win rate. Obviously, Kyle Kennard was the household name, had a 13% pass rush win rate. Bryan Thomas is with 12.9. Like when he had his eye, and again, didn't have a ton of opportunity, because when it was third and long and when it was time to get after the passer, it was Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard. Bryan Thomas can make it happen, and I think he's going to have a ton of opportunity to do so in 2025. But I think it's a good take. If you're going to play 500 plus snaps for us in 2025, got to be better against the run. Very fair. Here's another one. Love him. I think you might even like him more. Cisse and Henry. It wasn't good early. It wasn't good for him or Josiah Thompson early in 2024. In fact, it was downright bad for both of them. And it's kind of a funny conversation to have, though, because as LaNorris Sellers got better managing pockets and not just looking to drop his eyes and break the pocket, you saw the tackle play get a little bit more consistent as well. But though Cisse and Henry in 2024, 31 total pressures was not great. 10 of those came in a 2-game stretch against Kentucky and LSU. So I felt like we had this notion of this kid's a liability at right tackle, which wasn't necessarily false to start the month of September. It wasn't good. You fast forward to the end of November, we've talked about it for Josiah Thompson, but in Cisse and Henry's the same story. The last 3 games, he only gave up 2 pressures, and 2 of those games were against Clemson and Illinois. who has some very good edge rushers. Case and Henry was playing very solid football towards the back half of 2024. And if him and Josiah Thompson can take what they were doing at the end of 2024, specifically against Illinois, and just translate it to 2025, all of a sudden you look at that tackle duo and say, that should be a damn good unit for South Carolina in 2025.
And it should be a unit that I think, especially because where I thought both really started to get rolling and then the pass protection came up was their ability to move guys in the run game. Like Case and Henry feel like a good, powerful right tackle.
He's
can
nasty.
Move around. And once they started to run the ball more consistently, again, I think it took some pressure off them. I think LaNorris Sellers, he got a little bit more comfortable. So those two tackles should be, I mean, they're probably – the 1A part of their game is to be able to run the ball and be physical. I think that's where they both thrive the most. And then off of that, if they can just kind of translate what you said, like play the pat or be effective in pass pro like they were towards the end of the year, working off that run game, I think that's a really, really good tackle duo. And I know Josiah Thompson's the guy with the NFL upside, like the top 5 pick NFL upside. That's probably not Case and Henry realistically. But that tackle duo should be really good. And I don't think Case and Henry, or we shouldn't forget about him in that discussion.
Because again, the when you're talking about offensive line play, you're really only as strong as your weakest link. You can have 4 really, really good guys on the offensive line, but if you got a liability at one of the tackle spots, chances are you ain't going to be that good of a unit. Last year at times it felt like because it always felt like, all right, whether it was Josiah Thompson having a rough game or Case and Henry, it always seemed like one of those tackles was struggling early in the season. And then when you saw them kind of figure it out, you saw that offense start to click. Can we just be more consistent from both tackle spots in 2025? That's like my thesis statement on why I think South Carolina can be good in 2025 is everybody wants to talk about LaNorris Sellers. And look, I think LaNorris Sellers is a stud. I think this offensive line has the chance to be good. And you noted something, that run game, especially kicking Tree down to guard, has the chance to be really good. Really, really good in 2025. Last name, Dill. And here's my conversation with this is, look, we're going to talk a lot about Nick Harbor. And I think he has the opportunity to emerge as a true wide receiver one, not only for South Carolina, but I think he has the opportunity to emerge as one of the best pass catchers in the country. We know he has the tool set to do so. Like, God don't make many Nick Harbors with that size and that speed. Mazeo Bennett, I keep saying his name. Mazeo Bennett is a guy that not only was really good as a freshman, but I think is going to have to play a massive role for South Carolina in 2025, where you look at the pass catcher that was most important to South Carolina last year was tight end Joshua Simon. And I think they got a young one in Mike Smith who can do that role pretty well. But you're looking for LaNorris Sellers to do some of the simple stuff more consistently well. Well, Mazeo Bennett's that guy. I mean, he's an elite separator, doesn't drop the football. The one not knock, but the one thing I want to see him kind of take that step in year 2 is when you do have the football in your hands, can you be a little bit more of a difference maker for us? But you talk about a chain mover, you talk about a safety blanket coming out of the slot. Mazeo Bennett has a massive chance to be that guy for LaNorris Sellers in 2025.
And that's going to be can they develop more of that chemistry? Because I think one part of Mazeo Bennett's game that you really like is that savviness as a route runner, not just man coverage. He's got good ability to beat guys in one-on-one situations, but that ability when to sit it down, when to drag it across the field, that type of game, I felt like that really popped for him as a freshman. And that's something, frankly, that LaNorris Sellers needs to take that next step and being a little bit more comfortable making those type of throws and working with that type of wide receiver. So that duo to me, or what he can provide for LaNorris Sellers is probably that part where if you see LaNorris Sellers take that jump and not miss some of those easy throws and be able to make some of those plays more consistently, I think Bennett's going to have a huge part.
Yeah, we know this South Carolina offense is going to be explosive. It's impossible not to when you have a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers. Can we be more efficient in 2025? Feels like how South Carolina reaches a potential elite caliber offense in 2025. And we saw the glimpses of it in the month of November, but I think it has a chance to be even better in 2025. And that it's kind of the story of South Carolina season where, Look, I don't think many South Carolina fans who follow this program closely are saying the defense is going to be a top 10 unit in the country once again. Like, there's probably going to be at least a little bit of a pullback. Ideally, not that big a one. Okay, well, how do you make up for that and go make the playoffs? This offense taking a massive step forward, which it very much can in 2025. A lot of it has to do with LaNorris and Mazeo Bennett. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.